What are the things that need to be addressed to make that new start? And I will say very clearly, these are all very Christian, very Christian, very Bible-based things. Whereas we've been talking a lot of brain science up until now, the solutions to a large part are Christian. In fact, I've often felt that people who don't know a walk in the Spirit and don't understand the walk with Christ are kind of going into life only half-armed because they don't have all of the tools that God intended for us to have at our disposal. And then a lot of Christians don't understand those tools and don't know how to use them, and so they may as well not have them because they aren't really making use of them. And so our goal is to try to help understand what some of this is. So we're going to start with the first one is called stopping flesh patterns. Stopping flesh patterns. So we'll start by this idea of defining what I mean by a flesh pattern. A flesh-filled home is one that is filled with conflict. All right, it's one that's filled with conflict. And you go to, in James chapter 4, verse 2, it says, what is it that causes conflict among you? What is it that causes wars and battles? And the answer, he said, is it's because you don't get what you want. In other words, what the flesh, when we talk about the flesh from a Christian perspective, what we're talking about is that part of me that is just consumed with life here on this planet, and the Spirit is concerned with things that are eternal. And so my flesh that is just concerned with the things here in this life just wants what it wants. Right? I just want certain things, and whatever's going to get it, then I'm good with that. And so what happens in marriage is when I want something and you want something, what do? If those aren't the same things, right? If I want this and you want that and we don't want the same things, we get conflict. And now in that conflict, what's the question that always comes up is who's going to win, right? Who's going to get what they want? And if we don't have love, and I'm not talking about romantic love necessarily at this point. I'm talking about if we don't have a way to keep the relationships bigger than the problems, then our marriages always disintegrate into winning and losing. And it just becomes a series of arguments over who's going to win or lose this time. Instead of how can we find a way to keep our relationship bigger than all of this, no matter who's winning and losing these arguments along the way. So James says, what is it that causes wars and battles among you? It's because you don't get what you want. And it's interesting, the Greek word there that translated desire or you're not getting your desires, literally is the word from which we get hedonism. It's hedone, right? Which means your pleasure, your desire, the thing that you have a passion about. You're not getting that, and so you're upset with them because they're the ones that are keeping you from getting it. It's interesting, anger as an emotion largely goes back to somebody blocking your goals. It's like if you have a goal that says, I really want that ice cream cone, or I really want, just to keep it simple, I really want the ice cream, and but you won't give me the money, allow me the money to go buy myself an ice cream cone, you are blocking my goal, and so now I'm mad at you because, I can't get what I want because of you. Or you take it further, you say, what I want is a happy home. I want a happy home where everybody's happy being here, the kids are happy, and you like being here, and this is all good. But you keep doing things to make that not happen, and so I'm mad at you. And then the more angry I get at you, the less happiness there is in the home, and the whole thing becomes a cycle because my anger comes from the fact that, I feel like you are the one that is keeping me from getting what would make me happy. And so it makes us angry, it makes us quarrel, it makes us fight because we all think we know what is best in this situation, we know what we want. So if you go to Galatians chapter 5, verses 19 to 21, in that passage it says, the works of the flesh are obvious. Okay, the works of the flesh are obvious. And then it's going to contrast the works of the flesh with life in the Spirit. So let me read to you the works of the flesh. And as I read these to you, what I want you to do is listen for which ones here have to do with relational conflict. Okay? And then repeat back to me some of the ones, because it'd be hard to remember all of them, but just what are the ones you listen for here that relate to relational conflict? Sexual immorality, Well, that will certainly lead to relational conflict if you're having sex outside of the home. 2, impurity, which would be in our days like pornography and things that are impure. Debauchery, right, where I'm getting myself sated with alcohol and giving myself to my pleasures. Idolatry, and especially in some cultures, idolatry is much more prevalent than others. Witchcraft. And then it goes to hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage. I'm fed up, that's it, I'm not putting up with anything anymore, right? Selfishness, dissension, factions, envy. And then the last 2 are drunkenness and orgies. Now look at these are the works of the flesh being obvious. Now of those, what were some of the ones you heard that were about relational conflict? Specifically. Discord, right? Jealousy. Selfish ambition. Envy. Yeah. So if you look at your notes here, that whole center column, I think, is relational conflict, right? Hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition. You go to the last column, dissensions, factions, envy. It's all relational conflict. The other ones, sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft, drunkenness, orgies, I put into the category of self-indulgence. It's like me just indulging whatever I feel like, and which often contribute to relational conflict. And so what happens here is we got this box. Let me walk through. And that is that the way the flesh works from a biblical perspective is this, that the flesh has desires. And it's not wrong to have desires. But the flesh the flesh generates these desires and it just wants what it wants. And then so the flesh generates desires, and then we're told in Romans that the mind set on the flesh is death. So I'm asking myself the question, what does it mean a mind set on the flesh? If my mind is thinking about my desires, what is my mind doing? Well, let's come up with strategies. What kind of strategies? Let's come up with strategies of how I get what I want. How am I going to get what I want? Well, I could barter. Hey, I'll give you this if you give me that, right? Or I could threaten, you better give me what I want or I'm doing that. Because the flesh doesn't really care which strategies it uses as long as it gets what it wants. Now, the simplest way I know of to understand this is to think about the typical 4-year-old. All right, so the typical 4-year-old is coming downstairs for breakfast and says, Mommy, Daddy, I would like to eat sugar bombs for breakfast. You're like, sugar bombs for breakfast? That's ridiculous. You have to have this broccoli omelet. Now every 4-year-old's like, okay, fine, I'll have the broccoli omelet, right? No, right? They want what they want. So they are going to, now their mind is going to be set on this. So the fact that you've said, no, you can't have it, doesn't end the problem, does it? If anything, it escalates it because now it's become a challenge. Now let's see if I can't, I can figure out a way to get what I want here. And so you come up with strategies, and they'll do things to try to get what they want. Now, have you ever noticed that cuteness can be a flesh strategy? Right? Because, they'll go, please, you know I'm adorable. You want to give me this, right? And so you can tell when being cute is a flesh strategy by what happens when it doesn't work. Because the next strategy will not be so cute. And so they'll go to the next, they might go to the next one, which is maybe they'll use shame. Well, Billy's mom gives him sugar bombs every morning for breakfast. Billy's mom loves him, right? Or maybe they'll barter. I'll make my bed if you let me have this. Or there's the classic one. Okay, I'll go ask Dad. Because what happens is, but you stop and think about it, how many different strategies does a 4-year-old have to get what they want? Hundreds, right? There's hundreds of them. Now, what happens when one of them works? you get a pattern, right? When one of them works, it now becomes a pattern. Next time they want something, kid, come downstairs, it's the first thing they're going to do. It's like, in other words, like if it worked to go to dad to get it instead of mom, they're not even going to talk to mom the next time. They're going straight to dad. If it worked to throw a temper tantrum to get what they wanted, next time they come down, they're going straight to temper tantrum. You know? See if that one works. Because that's how the flesh operates. The flesh just wants what it wants. So that's the living in the flesh is just how do I get what I want? It's another way of saying how do I win? Right? So we said before, from a brain science perspective, again, I think this was last night, so I'll say it again. The right side of the brain is about relationship, and it is the right side of our brain that has to develop with maturity. The left side of our brain is about problem solving, and it is about winning and losing. And so when the right side of my brain shuts down and I'm not functioning like a mature person, the only thing that is left is winning and losing. So another way of saying this is that love, right, to walk in the Spirit, what's the number one fruit of the Spirit? The fruit of the Spirit is love, okay? Well, guess which side of your brain is primarily responsible for love? Okay, it's the right side of your brain. It's remaining relational and acting like yourself and helping people return to joy and being relationally engaged with people. The left side of my brain is all about winning and problem solving. So what happens when that brain switch goes off, right, and the right side of my brain kind of powers down, I'm not going to walk in the Spirit, and the only thing that is left to me is my flesh. And the only thing that's going to matter to me is how do I get what I want or how do I win? And what happens when you have more than one person in the house who are all trying to win and all trying to get what they want, you end up with conflict. You end up with a lot of this going on because nobody is getting what they want. Nobody feels like they're winning. And we got this huge problem. And so a lot of people, they react to this stuff differently, and they'll just take some people take their issues into hiding. Some people become obvious about their rebellion and their displeasure. Some people become passive-aggressive. But, it's all kind of flowing out of the same source that I'm living out of the flesh instead of out of the Spirit. So we go, what is the solution to this? So if you flip over to your next page, page 7. Bible tells Christians we are to crucify the flesh and walk in the Spirit. So what do we mean by crucify the flesh? One of my favorite marriage cartoons has a husband in the easy chair over here reading a book, and the wife in an easy chair over here reading a book. And the wife is reading a book called How to Be a Better Husband. And the husband is reading a book called How to Be a Better Wife. Right? And it's kind of classic because most of us are convinced if the other person would just change, everything would be fine. But the question of dealing with the flesh is always, I have to start by looking at my own flesh patterns and saying, what are my own flesh patterns where if I don't win, if I don't get what I want, I dig in my heels and I routinely have developed patterns that are very unhealthy, that are creating conflict in my marriage because I refuse, to give up what I want. So there comes I guess I'll tell you a story on this, might help. Learned some of this from a man named Bill Gillum. He's a psychology PhD in Oklahoma. And he was an interesting story. He and his wife, they got married before they were Christians. Then she got saved, and then he got saved. And then she started growing, and then there was this big gap between them for a while until he kind of got something that the Holy Spirit got a hold of him about, and he began to grow. And they ended their life doing marriage conferences together. Okay? So the way this story begins, Bill says you have to understand his childhood, that he grew up in a home with a very passive father. He said, now, one of the things that happens when you have a very passive father and a very domineering mother, he says you tend to get one of three things in your children. He said you either get someone who's gay because they don't think they're able to be a man. They don't know what it is to be a man. Or you get someone who's very passive, like their father, and is just dominated by women most of their life. or you get what he became, which is macho. And that is a man's man, right? I am super masculine. And so here he is in the state of Oklahoma. And in the state of Oklahoma, if you want to be a man, you got to play football. Right? So he was 5'2" and 120 pounds, but he was going to play football, doggone it, you know. And not only that, but he was like in the locker room, he realized that to stand out and be, you know, he felt like to be treated like a man, he told the dirtiest jokes of anybody in the locker room, and he used the foulest language of anybody in the locker room because he was going to be a man. And the other thing that came with this was an extreme hatred of women because he resented his mother for being so domineering in his life. And so he was one of the other things that he loved to do was to humiliate strong girls in class. So if a girl was showing particular aptitude or getting a lot of praise, he loved to just throw out a zinger that got everybody laughing at them because he couldn't let a woman win. That was his bottom line vow he had made about life. No woman will ever win. I will always come out ahead. Now, there's one problem with the whole macho thing, right? If you're going to be a real man's man, macho man, you kind of have to have a beautiful woman to fill out the image, right? You show up someplace and you don't have a beautiful woman on your arm, how can you be a real man? He says that's a real problem when you're afraid of women and you hate them. But you got to have one, and she better be pretty, right? So he decided the best solution to this was to put his sights on the homecoming queen and see if he could win her. Now, the homecoming queen was a gal named Annabelle, I think. Annabelle. And she had grown up in a home where there were all girls, and her dad really wanted boys. And she grew up her whole life feeling a little bit like she wasn't quite loved as much as she wished she was loved, and believing that if maybe she could be more like a boy, her dad would love her more, and believing that maybe if she was more competitive and won more. And so she learned how to earn acceptance from people by winning. She would compete. She was faster than any of the boys in her class. You know, she would compete with the boys in everything and come out ahead. And she said she still remembers the day where she kind of had this crush on the one boy in junior high, and so she wanted to get his attention by beating him up the mountain, that the whole class was hiking up the mountain, and so she made sure she was the first one up there, and she was like, now he'll notice me because I was the best, only to watch him carry poor little Susie back down the hill who had twisted her ankle and was the captain of the cheerleading squad. And he's like, oh, that didn't work. But she had a vow that said, I will find a way to make a man love me by outperforming him. Now, the two of them ended up getting married. Do you see any problems here? Right? They're both bringing this incredible amount of flesh patterns with them into this marriage. This flesh patterns of how they handle life. Right? That's what they're talking about. How do I get what I want in life? His answer to how do I get what I want in life was he was going to be a macho man. You know, he was going to get the beautiful woman. He was going to, but he had no idea what to do with her once he got her, right? Yeah, he's got the same thing here. She was going to be the best wife ever. She was going to be the best mother ever. She was going to perform. She was going to be, wonderful. So they get married. They go on their honeymoon. They come home, and it's poker night. So it's Thursday night. It's poker night. And he's got his buddies over and cigars, and she wants to be a great hostess. So she's in the kitchen making sandwiches and getting beers, cold, and she's cutting off the crusts on the sandwiches and making everything just right. She's coming out with her tray and the cold beer. But while she's out there in there doing this, she's hearing in the other room for the first time another side of her husband she has never heard before, because now he's with the guys. And for the first time, she starts hearing foul language coming out of his mouth she's never heard before, because he kept it hidden from her while he was trying to win her. She's beginning to hear dirty jokes coming out of her mouth that she's never heard this from her husband before, because he was hiding that from her while he was trying to win her. And then she comes in and she's like going through sort of this shock, like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? And she walks in without hardly saying a word, sets down the food, goes up, throws herself on the bed and just starts sobbing, like, what have I gotten myself into? Who is this man? Throughout their marriage, he began to sort of systematically destroy her psychological confidence. through what he called constructive criticism. And basically what it amounted to was she couldn't do anything right. No matter what she did, instead of getting appreciation, she got some explanation of how she could have done it better. For example, she knew that her husband loved biscuits and gravy. Okay, it's Oklahoma. Loved biscuits and gravy. And so she actually called up his mom for the recipe that she used. He made the exact recipe down to the exact temperature, the exact ingredients. He comes downstairs, he's reading his newspaper, drinking his coffee, eating the biscuits and gravy, and they're having what I call a left brain conversation. Okay, left brain conversation, he's reading his newspaper, he's drinking his coffee, she's talking to him, he's answering her questions. So it's like he hears everything she's saying, and he's giving her answers, therefore he thinks he's engaged. But what has never happened is actual eye contact. What has never happened is actual relational connection here. It's just an exchange of information. Left brain problem solving, left brain answers, left brain blah, blah, blah. And then when he gets done, he closes the newspaper. Well, it's time to go to work. Takes the last swig of coffee, eats his last thing. The last thing he says as he walks out the door is, by the way, those biscuits were just a little bit underdone. And heads to work. Might not seem like a big thing, but you get about 1,000 of those. And you start going, she was turning into a walking zombie. Like, I can't do anything right. She goes from being the most competent, homecoming queen, I can do anything, confident person, and she's been broken, basically, after a few years of this marriage. And it was about this time that she found Christ and gave her life to Christ. And it didn't fix everything like that, but it did give her some new tools, new resources, new relationship, new things that weren't there before. And eventually got to the point where the Lord said, you have to stop waiting for your husband to change, and you've got to deal with yourself. And she's got a picture of her sitting in a chair with a whole bunch of chains around her neck. And she goes, God, she'd take off a chain. She goes, God, this is the time my husband told me I would never amount to anything, and I don't know why you even try. I forgive him for doing that, and I hand this chain over to you. Like, God, this is that time when I tried to get all pretty and dressed up for the event, and he just said, I don't know why anybody would want to dance with you, and I forgive him for that, and I give that chain to you. And she began to unburden herself. And as she began to unburden herself in this way and began walking with God in the Spirit, something began happening. She began noticing that she didn't actually need her husband to give her sense of confidence, and she began living with confidence again and with freedom again because she knew that Jesus was her husband and Jesus loved her and that she was going to be okay with Jesus, and he began losing his control over her. It was like, wait a second. And as that began happening, he began to realizing it was harder and harder to blame her for all of his problems. As she began walking in more and more freedom. And so he finally got to the point where he had what he calls an aha moment. And an aha moment is where he realized, you know what, it's not my wife's flesh patterns that are destroying this marriage, it's mine. And he's like, God, I confess I have a problem with women. Right? He says, I have a problem with women, I confess. So I don't even know how to change. But I am admitting that this is where I am, and I am asking you, I'm saying, today I want to crucify this part of my life, and I want to begin anew. You're not going to change until you call it what it is and you admit that it's going on. I can remember when this happened in my marriage with Brenda. We were in a setting, and I was a pastor, and I began to notice as a pastor how many of our fights happened on Saturday nights. Right before I'm supposed to get up the next morning and tell people how to be spiritual, And I also noticed how many of our fights happened when we were shopping, okay, because we shop totally differently, right? For her, shopping is a relational bonding experience. For me, it is hunting and gathering. Let's go get it, let's go home, let's watch football. She is like... she's like, oh, let's go let this store and look at those and let's put some on hold, and then we'll go to this store and put some on hold, then we'll go to Starbucks and talk about which one you like better. And I'm like, I wasn't even paying attention. So we should have known better than to go shopping on a Saturday night. But here we are. It's like, hey, it's a date night. let's go shopping. And so we ended up in a fight in about 15 seconds. And literally walk into the mall. It's Christmas season. It's crowded. And she did something that triggered me. And I just shut down like a rock. Just boom. And it's like, well, we can't have this argument here in the store in front of everybody. I'm a pastor. What if somebody sees me? Right? So we go back out to the car, and it's like we're sitting about far away from each other as you can, and still be in the same car. And what happens in those settings is what I do is what I go into my man cave, right? I have shut down. I am not talking. I have retreated into my man cave. And in my man cave, I am rehearsing all of the reasons why she is the problem. And while I'm rehearsing all these reasons why she is the problem, this other random thought came in here that didn't really fit. And that other random thought was kind of, be careful, Marcus. I'm getting two stories confused. Let me go back. The thought that came in was, you knew she had issues when you married her. And I was like, amen. But the next thought that came into my head, but it isn't her issues causing this problem, it's yours. And I knew that was the Holy Spirit because it wasn't me. I mean, my thoughts were all on how this was her fault. So that first thought made sense. She's got issues. Amen, she's got issues. Then the second thought was, but it's not her issues causing this problem, it's yours. And all of a sudden I began to realize, you know what, he's right. It's my issues. That's the aha moment. The aha moment is you go, I know she may have issues, but I got issues, and those are the ones I'm responsible for. So God, here I am. I've got issues. So I said to her basically what I heard. And I said, I need to apologize because what's happening here is because of my issues, not because of yours. And I will agree to go get help. And so we went and met with a counselor a few times and started this journey. And all part of that journey, I began to find out I had some significant mother issues. And some significant that were impacting into the way that we were doing marriage. And so you find this stuff along the way that I had flesh patterns that had built up for how I got what I wanted and how I handled life. And until I was honest about them and said, here I am, God, we call those a big cross moment. Big cross moment, say, aha moment, it is me who has the issues. I confess what it is. Now, here's the other thing about this. It would be, John Maxwell in his leadership training has said, decision making is overrated. It's decision management that counts. If you don't believe it, think about how many times we said, I'm going to get in better shape this year. It's easy to make that decision, right? Managing that decision is another story, right? Or it's in the same way, it's one thing to say, you know what, I need to be a better husband or a better wife. I need to stop doing this. It's quite another to set up a plan for actually making that transformation happen. But I will say, having said that you still have to start. And you're not even going to start if you don't admit that there's a problem. So when it comes to overcoming the flesh, walking in the Spirit, we start by saying, God, this is the prayer. It's like, God, are there flesh patterns in my life that are sabotaging the success of my marriage? Just take like 2 minutes and ask him that, right? Say, God, are there flesh patterns in my life that are sabotaging the success of my marriage? And then somewhere private, secret, you can write down what comes to your mind when you pray that. Go ahead, take 1 minute, and we'll do that. God, are there flesh patterns in my life? My life. And once you've got one, you just say, God, I confess that this is true. That's what confession is. Confession is agreeing with God about what is true. Say, God, I confess that it is true that I struggle with this. You say, please help me to change. The next thing you need to do with this is ask God, who can I tell about this? It can't just stay between you and God. It doesn't necessarily have to be your wife or your husband first. But you think, who can I tell? Who is there in my life that I could trust with this information? And ask them to pray for me. They don't have to fix you. You just have to be able to trust them with the information. Most of us have this secret desire to perfect ourselves in secret and then show up all better. And it rarely works that way. You got to be honest with somebody else. And then encourage you, don't let this week go by before you contact. In fact, I would encourage you, don't let the weekend go by before you contact this person. Or at least contact them enough to set up a time to meet them so that you can tell them what happened. Just tell them, I was praying about this. I feel like this is a problem I need to work on. And I know you can't deal with these things in secret. I need to tell somebody. So I'm not asking you to fix me. I just need to tell somebody. Would you pray for me? Now, what you're looking for here, first of all, is you're looking for somebody who won't gossip. Reminds me of the three pastors who formed an accountability group. First pastor said, well, I got to confess now and then I dabble in pornography. Another one said, I got to confess every now and then I lose money gambling on the horses. The other one says, well, I got to confess I have a real problem with gossip. Yeah, you don't want to be sharing all of your private stuff with people who are just going to, I have a prayer request. My friend here has a problem. That's what we're looking for. You're looking for somebody with enough emotional maturity and capacity that they can handle what you're telling them without freaking out, feeling like it is now their weight to bear and their job to fix, and somebody who's not going to gossip. So that's what we're looking for, somebody who's safe that you can share this with. That's also why you don't necessarily form a lineup here and announce it to everybody, because not everybody's safe with this kind of information. So you have to find out who is safe with this kind of information. And then you continue to make it a point of conversation with God. So God, we need to keep coming back to this. And I want you to begin showing me what some of the roots are that are led to this. So remember, in his life, there were some root wounds here. And that was in Bill's life, the root wounds were, passive father and a domineering mother. Right? In my life, it was somewhat similar. And so I became more of a passive aggressive instead of macho. And so you end up realizing that there are patterns that fit out and that usually have a story behind them or roots to them. So as you move forward into this, you don't just say, Jesus, please take this away. Please take it away, because he rarely does that. You say, God, Jesus, take me to the roots of this. And would you begin to heal those roots so that from the roots something new can grow? And we'll talk more about this tomorrow. In the Sunday morning, we're going to be dealing with the Understanding the Wounded Heart. But I do have a book over here called Understanding the Wounded Heart, and it's really about getting at roots and about listening prayer and healing for damaged emotions and things like this, because that's really where a lot of our flesh patterns start, is they go back to root issues in our life that weren't fixed. So that's step one, in a sense. All that is, I got to be honest with it. I got to make this a point of connection with God. I got to share it with somebody else. The other thing I want to do is come up with a strategy for what do I do the next time I'm tempted in this area. Right? So the next time that I'm tempted to act like my old self instead of my new self, how do I handle it? So I've got an acrostic for that because I'm addicted to acrostics. And this one is stop, listen, obey, watch, which spells slow. All right, so it goes like this. Stop, listen, obey, watch. And I grew up in a Christian tradition where there was no expectation that God would ever speak to you. All right? My idea of Christianity was you study your Bible, you do what it says. If you don't do it well, you go back, you study it some more, and you try harder. All right, that was basically my background. I remember having some experiences where I realized God was speaking to someone I knew, and I'm like, well, this really does happen. So if God just speaks to them, why doesn't God speak to me? I'm like, how do I get God to speak to me? And so I asked a pastor friend, I said, how do you learn how to listen to God? And he goes, well, 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, no temptation has taken you except what is common to man. In other words, there's nothing temptation you face that other people haven't faced. He says, the next time you're tempted, this is what the verse says, he said, God will show you the way of escape. He said, so the next time you're tempted to do this, he said, stop and listen, and God will show you the escape, how not to give into that temptation. Obey what you hear and watch what happens. Right? So it's when you face a temptation, stop and listen, obey what you hear and watch what happens. Or you can stop and listen, don't obey what you hear and watch what happens. But so shortly after he told me this, I had an encounter with a friend, and I was in a church, and this argument was quickly escalating, and I was getting really angry. I mean, angry like I could feel my ears getting red. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck sticking up. I could feel the adrenaline in my body, and I had long ago lost any curiosity. I lost all appreciation for him. I lost all curiosity for him. I lost any desire to be kind to him. All I wanted to do was counterattack, right? Defend myself. And as I'm in this mode of defending myself, I remember the pastor's words, Marcus, next time you're tempted, stop and listen. So I did this very spiritual prayer I want to teach you today because it's a very important prayer. I said, okay, fine. That's the whole prayer. Right? It was, okay, fine. It was a bit sarcastic when I said it. It's like, all right, God, fine. If you want to speak to me, speak to me. And all of a sudden, I had this thought, and I didn't know what to expect for God speaking to me, but I just had this regular old thought, but it was a surprising thought. I wasn't expecting it. The thought was James 1:20. It was a Bible verse, James 1:20. And it was like such a surprising thought that I literally stepped back and go, what in the world is James 1:20? I didn't know what verse that was. I didn't know what it said. It literally distracted me from my argument. I was like, God, what's James 1:20? And I started going through the Rolodex, and I remembered, you know what, in 5th grade, private Christian school, we memorized that verse in the King James. It says, man's wrath, or anger, does not accomplish God's righteous purposes. I was like, ooh, that kind of fits, right? Because I'm really mad. I'm about to vent my wrath and try to fix this problem with my anger, and God's saying, man's wrath will never accomplish my purposes. But I was feeling pretty ornery. My flesh was pretty engaged. So I said, God, quietly in my head, I was like, God, could you be more specific? And another verse popped in my head. It was Proverbs 15:1. I was like, I remembered that one sooner. We had memorized that in 8th grade at the private Christian school I went to. And it was, a gentle answer turns away wrath. Which is actually more specific, isn't it? God was saying, I don't want you to vent your anger. Instead, be more specific. I want you to give a gentle answer. And in a flash in my mind, I began to see that if I handled this the way my flesh wanted to handle it and win the argument, he would eventually forgive me, but he would never trust me again. God showed me very clearly. He said, that ship will have sailed. He will never trust you again. And so I was at what you might call a mini cross moment. I'd made the big cross thing. God, I need to change. I need to make a difference. Now I'm at the moment of temptation. Am I going to crucify the flesh and live in the spirit, or what am I going to do here? And so I had stopped and I had listened, and I knew very clearly what God wanted me to do. He says, don't handle this with anger and give a gentle answer. Now it was up to me. Now clearly I obeyed, or I wouldn't be telling you the story, right? No. But in this case, so I said, all right, gentle answer. I said, all right, so what I hear you saying is that there's this great big problem and it's basically all my fault. That was about as close as I could get to a gentle answer. And literally, it looked like somebody had punched him in the stomach. He took a step back, and he went, wow. He says, I guess it does sound like that. He says, I think I'm just really frustrated, and I'm taking it all out on you. I'm sorry. So I got to watch what happened when I handled it God's way. And I'll be honest, my flesh was a little bit disappointed with his apology because my arguments were really good. I mean, I was really ready to, defend myself and show him why he was wrong. And it took me a while for my adrenaline to calm back down and realize, okay, this is going to be okay. And we were able to keep the relationship bigger than the problem in that setting. And by keeping our relationship bigger than the problem, the Holy Spirit ended up helping us keep the relationship bigger than the problem. And this was before I even knew the principle of keeping a relationship bigger than the problem. But apparently the Holy Spirit already knew it. Who knew? So this is what we're talking about. What does it mean to walk in the Spirit? What does it look like to walk in the Spirit? It involves this idea of having conversation with him throughout the day, paying attention to the thoughts that come into your mind. And here's how you can tell when it's the Holy Spirit bringing thoughts to your mind and not just your flesh bringing thoughts to your mind. Number one, they tend to be surprising. So I remember the first thing that came up was such a surprise, I didn't know what it was. Or when I was mad at Brenda, the surprising thought was, it's not her issues this time, it's yours. I don't normally talk to myself in second person like that, for one thing. All right, so it's like it was somewhat surprising. It wasn't in sync with everything else I was thinking. Two, the fruit of the Spirit is love, right? So does the thought encourage me to be more loving in the situation that I'm at? Well, in every case, yes. It's like I would be more loving to handle this the way that this thought is telling me to do it. And the third one is, does it bring you a sense of peace? Right? The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. So will this help to increase joy for the people involved? Will it help? Does it bring you a sense of peace and conviction that this is right? And as far as you know, is it biblical? So you just give it those quick tests, right? Is it somewhat surprising? Is it encouraging something more loving? Does it bring me a sense of peace? As far as I know, is this biblical? And if so, you say, even if it wasn't God speaking to me, that thought is in agreement with what God would want me to think. So I'm going to go with it. And that's kind of the way we do this. So we learn to walk in the Spirit by paying attention to those thoughts that the Spirit gives us. And it is a walk of obedience. Now, there have been plenty of times in my life where I have stopped and I have listened and I knew what God wanted me to do and I didn't do it. And I can tell you what happened. And it wasn't pretty. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a way to get what you want and win. Some people are like, oh, you mean if I stop and listen and obey, God will get me, I'll win? No, it doesn't say win, it says watch. You can't win every situation that you're in, but you can emerge from it knowing that you did the right thing and having a sense of peace about the fact that I know I handled that the way God wanted me to. And that's what we're after here. So strategies number one, right? For I need a new start. That's what we're talking about. I want a new start in my life. It means I've got to start by by walking in the Spirit. So S, stands for Spirit or stopping flesh patterns, whatever works for you. It is the idea that I need to stop flesh patterns and begin walking in the Spirit. And this is a quick summary of what that looks like. So let's be honest about our flesh patterns. Let's confess them to God. Let's confess them to somebody we can trust. And then let's start practicing this process of stopping, listening, obeying, and watching what God has for me to do. All right. Let's take another stand up and stretch, shorter break, maybe 5 minutes, because it's first session after lunch. Otherwise, everyone will fall asleep. So stand up, 5 minutes, get something to drink. Come back, and we'll start again on the next session here.